We got the news on Friday that the NBA has completed its investigation on Miles Bridges. We'll talk about his suspension today on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
We're Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your pods, and that does include YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com. Promo code Locked On. That's Doug Branson, who you see on your screen. As always, you can find his work on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. I'm Walker Mail. You can catch me every weekday from 12 to 3 on WFNZ Sports Radio 92.7 FM. Well, we got the news on Friday. Very NBA news dump worthy here, Doug, that the association completed its investigation on Miles Bridges after his arrest right before last year's free agency period for felony domestic violence. I'll just go ahead and read you verbatim the two paragraphs from Baxter Holmes on ESPN.com so I don't get this incorrect. The NBA suspended Charlotte Hornets restricted free agent Miles Bridges for a total of 10 games in the 2023-24 season if he signs with the team by then, without pay for his role in a 2022 felony domestic violence incident against the mother of his two children. The NBA announced the suspension Friday, noting that it was a 30-game penalty, but that the league deemed that Bridges, who did not sign a contract for the 2022-2023 season, has already served 20 games. So just to be clear, this is by the NBA standard, a total of a 30-game suspension in which they are deeming him having already missed 20 of them last season, even if he didn't play for a team, and that he will miss the first 10 games of this next season for whatever team he plays for, and then he will be available and able to play. Doug, before we dive a little deeper into anything else, that can be confusing. It can all seem very arbitrary, quite frankly, because it is arbitrary. What do you have to say about this suspension?
Just to be clear, it's not a 30-game suspension. I understand there are some financial implications of it being 30 versus, 20 served, 10 played, whatever. But this is a 10-game suspension, I think, as far as anyone that's paying attention to this is concerned. Before we dive too deep into this, though, I think it's important to kind of very quickly discuss how we got here. The NBA referred to her as the mother of his children. Her name is Michelle Johnson. When this incident occurred, she had a post on Instagram that detailed some of the injuries, pictures that I think if you bothered to look at them, I think would be hard to forget. And her quote at the time in the Instagram post was, quote, "I've allowed someone to destroy my home, abuse me in every way possible, and traumatize our kids for life." Those pictures also featured a photo of a medical report that said she sustained a nasal bone fracture, strained neck, and a concussion. Now, Miles Bridges pleaded no contest to the charges, and that ended the legal part of this process. But it was not an admission of guilt, but it was also not guilty. And the NBA, through their own investigation, which I'll just mention, no details of this investigation really, other than saying that they've done an investigation, interviewed numerous third-party witnesses as well as all the parties involved. Will we ever see any of the details of those interviews? I'm going to say probably not. Reviewing all available materials, will we see those materials or how any of this factored into the suspension? I'm going to say probably not. The NBA also consulted with a group of domestic violence experts. Will we know any names of those domestic violence experts so that we could maybe ask some questions of those experts and say, hey, what did the NBA ask? What do you think about this? How did it factor in? Are we going to find out any of that information? I'm going to say probably not. But the result of that court case was no contest. And but which is, the NBA obviously felt like he did something wrong. Otherwise, they wouldn't have suspended him. Why would you suspend him one single game if you thought he didn't do anything wrong? And so, all of this feels very shadowy, feels very collusion-y, feels very, I said this in my tweet after it came down, feels very like, all right, everyone, move on. This is over. Stop talking about it. Don't worry about it. And I think you're going to see over the next couple of months, however long this takes for Miles Bridges to find his next team, whether that be the Charlotte Hornets or another team, there's going to be a continuing process of, okay, nothing more to see here, nothing more to talk about here. We'd like to move on and not talk about this anymore. And I think, frankly, to me, that says we don't want to talk about it anymore because we don't care about it. Or at least we care about things like money more than we care about domestic violence, more than we care about women in general and their role in society and how we feel about them. So, all this feels very behind the scenes, collusion-y, shadowy to me, and I don't like it.
No, it's pretty hard, especially when you try to make sense of it. Here's my attempt on why there are 30 games, right? Because I agree with you. I think there should have been more. The 30 games are put in place, and Jay Nay noted this as well on Twitter, who is Hornets Twitter follow for some. He said suspensions of less than 20 games cost 1/145th of their salary per game. Suspensions of more than 20 games cost 1/110th of their salary. And so there is financial implications that you were suggesting. Those are the details and why they decided to go for 30. Now, when we talk about this being really arbitrary, right? They're trying to bake into the cake that he missed all of last season, and then they come up with 30, and it's okay. The math is really hard to try to figure out why the first 20 are going to be served last season. The next 10 are going to be served for this upcoming season. Are you trying to find round numbers in the arbitrary number you slapped on this in the first place? It makes no sense. But here is something, too, to consider, that the NBA is trying to come up with a number that also does not have an appeal come back at them in return. And I don't know if there's going to be any kind of conversation. I don't know if I'm naive. I don't know if it's stupid and just outright false what I'm suggesting here. But I don't know what kind of conversations there might be had with Clutch Sports, the agency of one Miles Bridges, Rich Paul, everybody knows him. So if you are talking with Clutch Sports and then you are saying, what kind of number do we put forth where you are not going to appeal the process, maybe there is some kind of agreement that 30 games, whether it's hush mouth, whether it's on the record, whatever, 30 games is the number that is going to be the most that also does not get some kind of appeal. Doug, for me, like I without a doubt in my mind, the NBA had that in the back of their mind, but just suspend him longer, have a harsher punishment, bring back the appeal, let that process play out. But the problem is, as you alluded to, the NBA is incentivized to move on from this as quickly as possible in their mind, and so is Miles Bridges. So when both parties are incentivized to get something done so they can just move on from it, then maybe this is a number you arrive at. 30 games arbitrarily split up between last season and next season, and that's where it all becomes a mess.
They could have taken the MLB route that the MLB took with Trevor Bauer. Extremely harsh suspension that indicates, hey, we take this kind of situation very seriously and we don't want it in our game. And then let the appeals process play out. And if you win, then okay. If you lose, then you've made the statement as a league about where you stand. It will disincentivize players, front office, any employee of the NBA. It will disincentivize that behavior moving forward. Can't eradicate it, but it will disincentivize it. And it sends a statement to fans that, hey, we don't tolerate this in our league. That's not what happened here. I'd like to point out that their rationale for this, the 20 games, which is, again, doesn't make any sense. He missed 82 games, so why does 20? None of it makes sense, all right?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
But here's the part that's interesting to me. Following his arrest and plea, Mr. Bridges did not sign an NBA contract for the 2022-23 season, missing all 82 games. In recognition of that outcome, the NBA has deemed 20 games of the suspension to have been already served. He didn't sign a contract. Why did he not sign a contract? That's the pertinent question here. Do you think that Miles just said, you know what, there's a lot going on, I think I'm going to take a year off? I don't think that's what happened. And I think if you think that, you're a little bit naive to think that there wasn't communication between Miles's team, the Charlotte Hornets, to say, hey, if you're thinking about signing him with that qualifying offer hanging out there, I would probably not do that because we're going to do an investigation. And other teams that may have been interested in pursuing him in restricted free agency. There is a reason why Miles Bridges did not play, and it has to do with the NBA. And so for the NBA to say, well, in recognition of him sitting out all 82 games out of the kindness of his heart, we're going to deem 20 games. It's just, again, it's all very weird. And, I think there's an interesting article on Substack, if you want to read it. Katie Heindel calls all of this vicious math to even figure out a number of games because look, as I said, the NBA clearly feels like that Miles did something wrong. They're not going to name it. They're not going to say domestic violence. They're not going to detail what they feel like he did wrong that would deserve 30 games. That's really 10 games. But they feel like he did something wrong. And the vicious math of deciding how many games that each, bruise is worth is a vicious game. And the NBA has decided to play it here. And the brutal fact is, Walker, that like all the stuff you said about that Janae brought up about his contract number and it hurts him more if it's a certain, nobody's going to care about that. Not a single casual fan, I don't even think people who pay close attention to the league or to the Hornets are going to know that.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Right. And so none of that matters to the people that are actually watching. The things that people are going to absorb from this, now that this suspension has come down, are Miles Bridges did something, but didn't go to jail for it and is suspended for 10 games. That's what people are going to take away from this, ultimately.
Yeah. So, and to that point, Doug, the NBA, you had been pretty confident that the NBA was going to show they did not care about women, because this is what we expect from our professional sports leagues for the most part. MLB came out with that suspension against Trevor Bauer. They've also had plenty of instances where they showed they did not care about women and some other domestic violence incidents. But you're right to bring that up. You were pretty confident in that. I thought this was a time where the NBA could set some kind of precedent, because this is, especially with an emphasis against domestic violence towards women, rightfully so, within the last 15 years, whatever timetable you want to put on it, we have not seen an incident like this with Miles Bridges. I'm not here to rank domestic violence incidents. I think we were all shaken a little more with what we saw from Miles Bridges and Michelle Johnson's post than other things that have been reported in the association prior to that. So with all of this information at hand, the NBA had a real chance, a real opportunity to say, no, we're not going to put up with this. This isn't going to happen. Do you feel like they did that with this suspension after their investigation? To me, the answer is a resounding no. Therefore, the NBA deserves all the criticism in the world.
No, they acted like a big business that is fully motivated by profits. And they knew, and here's what they know. They know that people will put up with this. They know that people will want to look past this. They know that there's a certain subset of fans that want to see Miles Bridges back on the court. And they know that the rest of the people, there's going to be a majority of people who say, God, this feels uncomfortable, but I'm going to look past it. That's what they're banking on. They know that people won't put up with owners that are racist. That's why they've gotten rid of 2 of them. And they know that that's something that fans will not put up with. And so they got rid of 2 owners because of it. But they know that fans will put up with domestic violence. I think and I think it's part of why we talk about it on this show, I think, is because the way I'll speak for myself, is that I feel like public advocacy on this can eventually turn the tide on this issue and make the NBA take this seriously, because they're not going to do it out of the kindness of their heart, because their focus is on profits. And if the NBA one day feels like that a domestic violence case will actually hurt their profits or hurt their image enough to hurt their profits, then they'll take a stand. But until people stand up and say that it will, that this is where we are.
Let's talk about what's next and other details as this suspension goes on. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
Do we feel that Miles Bridges will be a Charlotte Hornet next season? We'll get to that and much more here today on the Locked On Hornets pod. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. You can pick 2 to 6 players on a daily fantasy app or website, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available, and they offer projections on any sport you watch. That includes not only the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, women's college basketball, the WNBA about to start off, just had their draft. Shouts to Aaliyah Boston for the #1 pick. Soccer, esports, NASCAR, tennis, so many sports. You can just go check it out for yourself. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. You have safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and even Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com. Sign up today and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks gives you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks gives you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. More Locked On Hornets coming up next. All right, Doug, so now the question is, there's plenty of questions, but one that we'll start the second segment with is, do we think Miles Bridges will be a Charlotte Hornet next year? You and I have both guessed that he would as soon as this entire thing was over, or the investigation, at least for the NBA, was over. Will Kunkel of Queen City News, he had a tweet over the weekend that suggested they are going to attempt to bring him back. Here is the exact tweet. Quote, I'm talking to people around the Hornet. It's the belief that the front office will attempt to re-sign Miles Bridges. The organization knows they can't lose him for nothing, and it gives them a higher chance to re-sign LaMelo Ball. In parentheses, Ball and Bridges are good friends. The organization is hoping missing all of last season plus 10 games next season will help with public perception. So it's interesting because the wording of that tweet, I know Will well. I don't know if the Hornets would have loved for that tweet to go out, just because the last sentence is a problem for me, Doug. They're hoping last year, missing all of that, and then the next 10 games will help with public perception. Okay. Little, kind of gross. And then also you're talking about...
Not kind of gross, really gross.
Yeah. You're talking also about, not only, right, like you're just reporting in the first sentence there and talking to people with the Hornets. It's a belief that the front office will attempt to re-sign Miles Bridges, but also they know that they can't afford to lose him for nothing. Okay, I guess. I mean, to me, there are certainly ways that you could. I've always talked about this, right? And sorry for taking most of the beginning of the second segment here, but it reminds me, and I've talked about it before, Kareem Hunt. When the video comes out of him kicking a woman in a hotel lobby, Kansas City decides to drop him. Okay. Kareem Hunt, very talented running back. Awesome. One of the best in the league at that time. And he was young, rookie scale contract, valuable stuff, all that. But they decide to drop him. The Cleveland Browns pick him up, and they have an awesome 1-2 punch in Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb. And I mean, how much detriment do you think that was for Cleveland to sign Kareem Hunt once he was available, and they got him for nothing? Well, they whatever, they signed him, right? In ways it might have even worked out for Kareem Hunt because he got a bigger payday sooner, whatever, right? The point was, Kansas City at the time was the team that couldn't hold on to him. They drop him, Cleveland picks him up, and so Cleveland doesn't get quite the backlash that Kansas City does. So if you are the Hornets and you try to take this exact example and apply it here, are the Hornets going to feel cheated, as gross as it is? Are they going to feel cheated for trying to drop Miles Bridges or not bring him back, allow another team to sign him, and then have something very similar happen where eventually we just are cheering for whatever slam Miles Bridges has on his way to helping a team win whatever he helps them win? That's the mindset of Charlotte right now. And they've got to figure out how much they care if somebody else does sign him and then reaps all the benefits of the talent that he has on the court, possibly at a discount because of this, whatever you consider a discount is. And they have to figure that out. And it seems like they already have, and it's something we're not surprised about.
Well, I can't separate that tweet from the countless times we've heard Mitch Kupchak say some version of, we're not going to go into free agency looking to, go big game hunting or get a big name player to improve the team. That's not how they envision themselves improving the team. They envision themselves improving the team by drafting players and then re-signing those players once those players prove their value. It almost feels like the organization views that as the only possible way they could put a winner on the court. Their minds are not open to any other kind of possibility. So I think when you hear something like, well, they know they can't lose him for nothing, that's I think an organizational failure, that they can't, a failure of creativity, that they can't envision any scenario where this team wins without having to completely sell their soul and take on a potential PR disaster because they have no other way to move on. It feels very inhuman to me, and it is gross, but that is where the organization finds themselves. I think what's interesting is the potential, Walker, for a team sale. And if this team were to sell to a group led by Gabe Plotkin, who is, does have a minority stake in the team already, but I don't know if he's very involved in sort of players and draft. I wouldn't think so. I think it's more of a money play. So, if that Gabe Plotkin led group were to take over the team, would they feel it as necessary as this current front office does, because the front office drafted Miles Bridges? Would they feel as inclined to do that and take on the heat that will, come? Although I will say that the Hornets betting on people, not just based on my interactions with people on Twitter and other Reddits and commenters on Every Hornets Boxscore, I think it's a good bet to bet that people will be willing to eventually look past this.
Well, and that's just it, though, right? When you say take on the potential PR disaster, I don't expect that to happen.
I said potential, yeah. So I think the only way that this really becomes a PR disaster is if some of the details that the NBA is not going to release, some of those investigation materials, some of those numerous third-party witnesses, some of the domestic violence, if any of that stuff leaks, if we get more details about what the NBA found out, and those details are damaging to Miles Bridges, then they would ultimately be damaging to the Charlotte Hornets. They'll get a short-term burn, though. I mean, you'll have national commentators going, the Hornets are disgusting for doing this, and then time will pass, everyone will move on, and if the Hornets, if the Hornets next year or the year after were to make the playoffs, I don't think anyone's going to be talking about it.
No, yeah, but that's right? Like that's when we're talking about the potential, and I understand for sure. But that's kind of what we're banking on. It's what you've said a million times. It's what I've agreed with. It's that, we don't expect there to be this huge backlash. Part of that is something we talked about, maybe last week, about how, if this was a major market, if this was New York or LA or, a big 4, big 5 market, then this would have a different kind of light shed on it. But it is Charlotte. It is the NBA and not the NFL, right? There are a couple of things working for them in that way too. And just wanted to mention your change of ownership. Hopefully there would be some kind of, that would be the way to move on. Well, one, we know Gabe Plotkin's history. While it's all financial, griminess, it's still griminess. And then we can also go to the fact that different ownership might not be emotionally attached to a player that they drafted because they didn't do so, but they do want talent. They are going to welcome all of the talent. You don't move on from the good players on your roster. And so if Miles Bridges was a fringe all-star the year prior, was your leading scorer, was your leading rebounder, and this owner wants to come in and make a big splash. I mean, we see this all the time with new owners that come in, they make the big trade. We just saw it with Phoenix. You'll see it quite often with the LA Clippers, Steve Ballmer. All right, let's go after everybody in the world, and then I'm, going to dance while we do it. What are the Hornets going to do? Maybe there's not some kind of central figure, and because it's a group-led purchase here with Plotkin, but he still is the headlining name, they're going to want to make a big splash as well. And so it's not something where you move on from talent, right? Like that's, to me, I would still think they'd hold on to him, and I don't know how much that would change anything.
Yeah, and let me be clear, I don't blame any fan who is resigned to all of this at this point, is exhausted by sports in general and the way they treat these situations. And a Hornets fan that is resigned because this team has been so badly mismanaged for years, and they're currently in the longest active playoff drought in the NBA, and the only team that hasn't had a Christmas game. Things are pretty dark around this franchise in terms of just pure numbers, winning, losing, that kind of thing. So, I feel like those fans are really the victims of a machine that only cares about money. So I feel for those fans and the tough, I don't feel for the fan to say, Miles didn't do anything wrong and I'm ready to see him dunk it up. Like I don't feel for those fans at all. I feel pity for those fans, but for the people who are resigned to this and don't really, kind of just want to move on, I definitely see where they're coming from.
Yeah, and let's talk about some of the other aspects at play here. We got one more segment to go. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
We'll finish up with some of our thoughts on Miles Bridges' suspension, and then we'll end it from there. If you're looking for a delicious snack, then let me introduce you to Built Bar. This episode is brought to you by Built Bar. You got to try it if you're like me and you want healthier snack choices, but you also have a hard time compromising on taste and maybe some of that sweetness, then you can go for Built Bar because they're covered in 100% real chocolate, but they're also low in calories, they're low in sugar, yet high in protein and high in fiber. And what's great is that they come in these flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream. There's so many good ones. And now you don't even need to wait to get your box after you order it online. For years, we've been talking about ordering Built Bars at Built.com, which you can still do, but now you can get them at your local Walmart or even Sam's Club, while you can still get your specialty flavors still at Built.com. So if you're close to a Sam's Club and you want to get something in bulk, grab a 13-bar box with some of their hit flavors. And if you want to go to Walmart, that's fine too. Just go to the pharmacy section and you can grab a 4-bar box of Built Bar. We always appreciate their support. One more segment to go. Locked On Hornets. Doug, there's something else a part of that Will Kunkel tweet too that was in parentheses, right? And I wondered, I don't wonder. I acknowledge just what they're going to be thinking about this when Will Kunkel puts in, quote, Ball and Bridges are good friends, end of parentheses. LaMelo is their star player. How many times have we talked about this being the best thing to happen to the franchise, not only in over 20 years, but depending on how long he stays, and he has a real possibility of being the best thing ever to happen to the Charlotte Hornets franchise. Mm-hmm. And so after you have all of this conversation, and it's not only after, it's been here as soon as he was drafted, right? Because he's an LA kid. LaMelo was a celebrity, way more so than other guys coming into the league. Oh, he belongs in LA, that he's from Chino Hills. He'll go back and play for the Lakers just like it was planned for Lonzo to do as soon as they had the number 2 pick, whatever. It's always been outside noise, but that has been noise nonetheless. And so now here we are trying to think of ways to hold on to LaMelo so desperately so. I think that despair also crosses over into this Miles Bridges situation because it's pretty easy to see that they are best friends. I would hope that the Charlotte Hornets would not have this a part of the equation when trying to figure out if they want to bring him back. But Doug, it's even in a tweet on a report of somebody saying he's talking to the organization. Like this is going to be a part of the process here. What does this do for LaMelo if you move on from Miles? And so, if you were able for yourself, right? I know we're able to move on from him, but as an organization, if you were able to move on from Miles Bridges and let somebody else get him for nothing, then what would that do about LaMelo's faith in the franchise, however wrong it may be to say that, right? Like whatever LaMelo's feelings are, that I wonder, that's got to be another thing that is on the plate here for the Hornets to try to figure out, as they just said it to a reporter. And, that does add another layer to all of this.
Yeah, I guess. I think that it's pretty clear that bringing back Miles Bridges would have the support of most, if not all, of the locker room. Several players were seen chatting with Miles after a win against the Lakers, right before that report came out that the Hornets were in contract or close to contract talks with Miles Bridges, which the Hornets would then later say, no, we weren't doing that. So whatever you want to take from that. But so there were several players chatting with Miles Bridges. I think the team would support this. The players would support this move. And in terms of doing it to keep LaMelo, I think the organization has been pretty clear that that's not their current motivation. They don't view LaMelo as sort of the perennial all NBA player that's been in the league 10 years that you really have to cater to. That they have been almost overcorrecting and almost going out of their way to say that's not what we're doing here. We're not consulting him on the coaching move. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. So I don't think that that's really factoring into the calculus. Although it may in the just sort of overall broad paintbrush stroke of, hey, eventually we've got to win. If we keep losing, LaMelo's going to go somewhere where there's going to be winning. He said it after his or during his exit interview. Winning is very important to LaMelo Ball. So if the Hornets don't win, then they're probably not going to retain LaMelo Ball. Maybe they'll do it for the first contract, but maybe not the second.
Well, yeah, and there are other ways to make him happy, right? Like, the only path to winning is not by just bringing back Miles Bridges and whatever PR backlash that comes with it. The $140 million, that's going to help you too. The contract extension, in which you can pay him more money than anybody else, that's going to help quite a bit too. Right. So, especially with this top 4 pick, and then we've talked about the win aspect to this. Yeah, like, okay, maybe LaMelo is frustrated. And then you talk about the broad paintbrush stroke that might be just keeping LaMelo happy. Okay, what do we do to keep LaMelo happy? Like, that would be a part of this. I think LaMelo would be happy. Maybe it's irresponsible to speak for him, but he's also talked about this before when he was asked initially during media day when we already had news of the arrest that LaMelo was, I forget what he said, but it was not damning for sure towards Miles Bridges in any sense.
Yeah, and if the opposite were true, right? If Miles Bridges, if the locker room wasn't a fan of Miles Bridges as a player, if he was a selfish player or, was just cantankerous in the locker room and was just constantly an annoyance, then that would certainly factor into the calculus for the Charlotte Hornets. They would say, okay, he's a headache in the locker room. He's a headache in PR. Okay, let's just move on. So I guess the opposite of that being true, he is generally well liked in the locker room, and the team, I think, the players would support this move. At least makes this easier for the Hornets to pull off the PR dance that they're going to pull off, and that I think there are a subset of fans that want to see them pull off the PR dance. I mean, I've gotten some comments on the article that I wrote up, or the brief that I wrote up for Every Hornets Boxscore, and just several of the comments are just essentially like, they want, if the Hornets decide to re-sign Miles, they want to see Miles apologize, which I think is really interesting because to this point, we really haven't heard anything from Miles Bridges, and he pled no contest to the charges. That got 2 of the charges dismissed that were related to the act, allegedly taking place in front of his children. And so those were dismissed. And in the felony domestic violence charge that he did plead no contest to, he did not have to admit guilt. Mm-hmm. Right? And so how does one not admit guilt there and yet have some contrition that will satiate fans? Because there's a way to come out and say, I'm sorry that this incident was a distraction, right? The sort of classic apology, non-apology. Will that satiate fans, or will fans actually want him to say, look, I did something wrong here. What did you do wrong? And I apologize for it. And it'll be really interesting to see how they pull that off.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. If there's any other comments you want to get to, I want to finish with some of those as well. I did want to bring up one other thing, is that what makes this also difficult is that Michelle Johnson herself, who should be heard first and foremost above all else, Michelle tweeted out on April 15th, I already said I forgave him months ago. I'm thankful he gets another chance in that path. We all deserve some second chances. And so with Michelle Johnson also sharing this as well, it's okay to feel it's okay to feel weird about this, right? Because you see the post that Michelle also posts on social media, and you don't want that to happen again. You want some necessary discipline for that. It doesn't feel like it was given here, which is why we're having this conversation that is not exactly favoring the suspension of the 30, quote unquote, but really 10 going into next season. But also, if the victim, Michelle Johnson, is sharing this opinion of saying, I want him to have a second chance, we do know that even if rightfully so, we criticize the statement that referred to Michelle as the mother of his 2 children. She is indeed still the mother of his 2 children, and he is the father of Michelle Johnson's 2 children. I can understand those really complex feelings that you might have right now, and she's the one saying there should be a second chance. Hard. I don't know, Doug. right? Like that's really tough. And so at the end of the day, if she should be heard first and foremost above all else in this matter, then okay, your message is received, Michelle, and it looks like he's going to get a second chance.
Right, but it's to me, it's the NBA's responsibility. I think it's their both business responsibility and societal responsibility. And I have that naive belief that big businesses should operate with some kind of societal responsibility. They ask a lot of the public. They ask us to pay a lot of money to consume their product. And I think they have a responsibility to the public. Okay. I know a lot of people will say, well, you're just, naive and that's not the reality of the situation. That's fine. I recognize it's not the reality of the situation, but I want it to be. Okay. And I'm going to continue to fight and speak on this microphone until it does become the reality, or until I kick it, whichever comes first. So, saying all that, it's the NBA's responsibility, in my mind, to ensure that the punishment that they lay down disincentivizes the act from occurring from its employees. And I said the same thing when we talked about the James Bouknight drunk driving offense. They don't take that seriously either, because the punishments that they lay down for those offenses don't stop play. They don't make players think about this kind of thing. They know that they're going to get away with it. And so, it's their responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen and that the public has some idea that they take this seriously. I don't think that the punishment that the NBA has laid down accomplished either of those goals, and that's extremely disappointing. And I think that there are a lot of complex dynamics when it comes to relationships involved with domestic violence, especially when they involve children. And so I don't really, but without knowing them personally, I don't really have much comment on that. And any of the news that has broken since the act. I saw the pictures. I believe I have some idea of the damage that was caused and the act that was committed, regardless of what the result was in court. And I take that very seriously. I think the NBA should take that seriously. I don't think they did.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's not like you can't set an example or a precedent that you're not going to tolerate this, and also not grant Michelle Johnson her wishes too. Like, you can have it both ways. You can have some kind of action of suspension where there's going to be more than just the 10 games going into next year, right? So yes, absolutely, that should be considered. Any final thoughts, Doug, before we end it?
The NBA doesn't care about women.
Very good. That's a good final thought from you, Doug. And I think with Miles Bridges, when we're talking about this suspension, the NBA had a chance, and they decided, like, a unique one, right? Where they're not unique. It was just different. This was a